Mrs. Carrie Williams. B-17.
World War II witnessed the emergence of a third dimension in warfare, in which the air became a primary theater of operation in addition to the land and the sea.
Allied bombing pilots had, some of them had very short lives, right? This was very dangerous work that they were doing, especially the daytime raids.
Out of the west, 1,350 American bombers of the 8th Air Force streaked their vapor trails into the dawn.
One of the missions, Dad had almost all the fuel cells in the plane shot out. My dad told everybody to get their parachutes on and bail out. They handed the parachute to my dad. My dad said, "I'm taking it across." So the navigator looks at him and says, "You're going across, we're all going across." And they made it.
650 American flying fortresses inflicted severe damage on German defenses along the invasion coast.
Max Blanchard, along with a few of his other co-workers, were wondering what can we do to support the men and women who are fighting for us.
Hanford, they're doing something that wins the war, but no one really knew what Hanford was doing. They just knew it was involved in the war effort. And so you could see the appeal of a campaign like Give a Day's Pay.
It's so astonishing because of the pride Dad had in that plane and understanding that people, hardworking people, paid for that.
So they always felt this was not their plane, it wasn't the government's, it belonged to the people of Hanford.
This is the people's plane. Like, this isn't our plane, this isn't your plane. Like, this was a gift. It lives on, you know, there's just something that's timeless about the Day's Pay. To the crew members of Day's Pay, we have been looking forward with anticipation to some report of the activities of our bomber. We recently received the desired information and are pleased and proud of the part our bomber has taken in its functions so far carried on. Keep pitching. Which I just love, like, how clearly like ownership is being claimed, right? Of, you know, our bomber.
In a sense, it is more than the story of a military operation. These planes, high in the skies over Germany, were a symbol of the unshakable unity of the Allies in their determination to fight together until victory and peace had been achieved.
One of the most well-known parts of the Hanford site was the Hanford Construction Camp. Hanford is, of course, one of the 3 sites of the Manhattan Project. Deliberately misleading name. You wouldn't want to call it the Secret Atomic Bomb Project. And the 3 sites are Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and then Hanford, Washington. There was housing for about 46,000 people at the construction camp. And that was barrack-style housing, hutments, and trailers. Actually, the world's largest trailer court at the time.
Yeah, life for them, especially in the early stages, was a little bit rough. Definitely a lot of wind they had to deal with and heat early on. They just knew it was a construction project. The handout was given to them in March of '43. It's an important war project, and outlined what their expectations were for safety and also to not talk. And during the interview, they were also told that if they were to speak about the project, that there were hefty fines and possible prison sentences. So, for the most part, the men didn't talk.
They all know it's some kind of defense project because they're working for the Army Corps, but very few would have known the actual purpose. Your average worker, your average construction worker, union worker, cafeteria worker, no. Many might have guessed, or at least guessed that it was some kind of weapon, but they would, one, most likely would not have known, and two, certainly were not talking about it.
June 2nd, 1944. On this day, 650 American flying fortresses inflicted severe damage on German defenses along the invasion coast. Farther north, 300 American liberators bombed military...
When it happened, of course, it hit the news and it hit the Sage Sentinel that American forces had finally made inroads into Fortress Europe. Max Blanchard, along with a few of his other co-workers, were wondering, what can we do to support the men and women who are fighting for us? So the request was made out to the War Department, what should we purchase? The answer came back fairly quickly, a B-17.
So Max Blanchard was an employee of the Hanford Engineering Works. Seeing the success of D-Day, but realizing the long struggle that Allied troops would have in retaking continental Europe, they wanted to do something to support the war.
Because when they come from other projects, other DuPont projects or Remington Arms projects, they knew they were making bullets, bombs, whatever. It was for the war effort. They knew they were making tanks or whatever the material was needed. Here, they're just eating sand and drinking beer and eating as much as they can at the mess halls.
And of course, all throughout the war, there had been war bond drives where celebrities and others had, extolled the public to give money to buy war bonds. But that can feel really abstract.
So this idea of buying this airplane was a real boost. It was a morale booster because it's like, now we're doing something.
Like I said before, no one really knew what Hanford was doing. They just knew it was involved in the war effort. And so you could see the appeal of a campaign like Give a Day's Pay to purchase a bomber, because that bomber could then be that kind of manifestation.
Now they felt they were making a difference.
They solicited ideas and they came up with this idea of Day's Pay.
Colonel Mathias loved the idea, continued to move forward with it. Posters were put up around the construction camp as well as the city of Richland, asking people to donate a day's pay towards the aircraft. A contest was held to come up with the name of the plane. There were about 6 to 8 entries, I believe, that said day's pay, and so that was the decision.
And one interesting thing about the campaign, and one thing also to tie people to this campaign, was they basically gave shares, like stock shares, like paper certificates. When you gave the day's pay, you got your share of the day's pay campaign. You basically got a stock in that plane. So another way to physically tie people to that. And this was a special plane. Certainly to the people at Hanford, it was a special plane. In July 1944, a transport crew picked the plane up at the Boeing factory and flew it over to the Hanford Construction Camp airfield. There was a big ceremony. Thousands of people attended, school children, kids that were at the Hanford Construction Camp. People were so proud to see it. Thousands of people attended. It was July, of course, in the Tri-Cities area is a scorching month.
It was hot. And you can see it in the faces of the people. If the camera resolution was much better, you could probably see the beads of sweat coming off their foreheads up underneath their hard hats and hats. But Katie Bell Harris was, who had lost a son earlier, was also a B-17 crewman, and she was chosen to be the one to christen the Day's Pay, and it was on the number 4 engine boss.
It was thousands of people attended to see the ceremony. And so Max Blanchard really hit upon, this really great idea, right, of really connecting people in Hanford to the specific war aim.
And then afterwards, the band played and the crowd all sang the Day's Pay song. And the 3-member ferry crew fired it up, took off, swung back over the top of the airfield, dipped its wings 3 times, and headed on its way.
My dad was actually, when he got out of high school, he went to Wichita, Kansas, went to work at Boeing. He worked at Boeing for 3 years and then was drafted into the Army. And they were losing so many pilots and gunners that they started opening up to anybody that could pass an aptitude test could switch over to the Army Air Corps. My dad still had to keep doing his infantry training. He was burning up a set of batteries every week, studying all night. He'd pull his army blanket over and he would study for this aptitude test. And when he took the test, there was 800 and some people took that test and he finished number 3.
Robert M. Neal, the co-pilot, he's from Texas. He was working in a pipe plant before he joined the Army. He joined the Army in 1944, and his wife and their one son, she purchased a trailer, hitched it up to the car, and wherever he was transferred to, she took that trailer to every spot in the United States where they had different training. But what's interesting is the Neal family also knew the Purcell family. Matter of fact, when Purcell's other brother joined the military, they were kind of torn because the one son, Archie Purcell, went to the Army Air Corps, so they had to make a decision, which son do we follow? And the dad still had to stay home and work, so the mom went to California, where the other son was stationed. Then we have to go to the waist gunner. That's Edwin Stewart. Edwin Stewart from Florida. He was the baby of the bunch at 19. He also had to be one of the biggest guys there, which is why he probably fit better in the waist than anywhere else. And then you have Chester Pierges. He was from Lorain, Ohio. And another young man, 20 years old, he was tail gunner. And the top turret gunner, of course, was Rudy Crack. He was a flight engineer. He's from the New York area. Very, very proud of his service, loved his crew members, absolutely loved them. And that love was, it's unique for men like that to endure situations that none of us alive now could even begin to imagine. And of course, now you have the radio man, Alan Cohen. He's a Pennsylvania guy. His family was in the jewelry business. So they go to Seymour Deutsch. Red was his nickname. He's from Brooklyn, New York, and joined and became a navigator. Red was the fellow who kept the men together in a lot of ways through some difficult times because of his religious affiliation. They looked up to him because he was kind of like this wise old soul of what, 20? He tried to become a pilot, but now these are his son's words when they were doing flights in Gowan. He's bringing the B-24 in, and it came down so hard it snapped off the front wheel. And the instructor turned to him and says, "You will never fly a B-24, ever." Those are his son's words, not mine.
First plane my dad drew over there was a B-24 Liberator with the nose paint of Shoo Shoo Baby. He flew that 12 full missions. A 13th mission, they took off and the generator quit. They couldn't make the generator run. So they didn't have the heated muffs, they didn't have anything for the gun sights, wouldn't have power for the radio. So they had to turn around and go back. They got penalized that mission didn't count. And so the next 13th mission he drew Hanford's plane, day's pay. And of course, you know, everybody, 13th mission the first time came off not so good. What's the second 13th mission going to be like? And they flew that day, and I virtually no flak, no fighters, very easy mission. By the second mission, Dad had said that that plane could almost fly itself. He said it was so easy to fly. The B-24 Liberator, he said, was a cumbersome plane, didn't fly as good. He said the B-17G flew almost like the Spearman he was trained in, as a single engine plane. And so he was just overwhelmed with how good the plane did.
Going into the bombing run, you've really got to protect the bomber, because they've got to fly straight and level through flak and fighters to get their bombs onto the pinpoint targets down below.
Sometimes they got fighter escorts, sometimes they didn't. The P-51 Mustangs, they really liked it when they got them for fighter escort, because if the Germans seen that they had 51s with them, they wouldn't come up after them. The P-51 pilots realized this, so when they got close to the bomb site, they would hang high and right, way behind the bomb group, and wait for them to send the Messerschmitts up after them, and then the 51s would go after the Messerschmitts.
While they are still climbing, the fighters stay in close. Then it's wide open. The throttles are blasted forward as the combat begins.
You know, Dad says occasionally you kind of felt like it's a piece of steak, you know, put out there for some bait.
After all the bombs are away, the forts and libs must fight their way home again. That's not easy, because many of them are cripples now. Look at that fort's tail. A 20mm chewed it off. And now is when pressure groups speed into the battle to help their big friends get back to Britain.
It proved itself to be a very sturdy, dependable high-altitude bomber that could survive a fair amount of enemy fire of flak. Of course, it being a higher altitude plane did pose its own challenges. Bombing from a higher altitude is generally much less effective than bombing at a lower altitude, so there was there was a lot of extra training that had to go in, and just some of those campaigns just missed their targets. But it was generally considered to be a more rugged and especially more dependable plane. Seems from the airmen that flew them in that they had the B-17 was their preferred plane.
It's hammer, hammer, hammer every mile of the way. Twin-engine Huns come up now with their long-range rocket guns.
The German fighters would never attack them from the sides. They would attack the 24s from the side because they had so much more firepower. You know, if you come at the side of a B-17G, you could have the top turret with 250s, the bottom turret, waist gunner. You could have 4 or 5 50 calibers aiming at you at any one time. And so they would not come at them from the side. They come at them below and from above. One of the things he always talked about was, his exact quote is, "It's a top flying plane and it's surely paid for itself." And he was talking about Hanford's employees paying for that, because he had so much appreciation knowing that these people volunteered to pay for this plane.
They were completely enamored of the idea that a group of people they had no idea that were supporting him so valiantly by giving up a hard-earned days, hard-earned work to purchase a plane. So they always felt this was not their plane. It wasn't the government's. It belonged to the people of Hanford.
You know, that plane was so important to that crew. Arliss and the other crew members were so proud of flying that plane specifically because of the connection that it had, because they knew that people had specifically given that plane, and they took really great care of it. You know, the plane did not get shot down.
One of the missions, Dad had almost all the fuel cells in the plane shot out. They were trying to get back to England, and they had one engine running. My dad told everybody to get their parachutes on and bail out. Everybody gets their parachutes on, they walk up, they hand the parachute to my dad. My dad said, "I'm taking it across." He didn't want their plane to go in the drink. He was willing to basically die, try to make sure that plane got home, because he appreciated how much people paid for that plane. Not the government bought that plane, the workers at Hanford Energy Group. So the navigator looks at him and says, "You're going across, we're all going across." And they made it.
The friendly coast of England slips by below. It doesn't look like much now, but in a few hours when you come back, if you come back, this will be the most beautiful view in the world.
They landed with 25 gallons of fuel left. Those planes were burning 413 gallons an hour, and they landed with 25 gallons left. The only engine they had running when they got home was number 4 engine. It was the number 4 engine that she had christened. It is so astonishing because of the pride Dad had in that plane, and understanding that people, hardworking people, paid for that. You know, he talked about that more than just a little bit, you know, the appreciation he had for that. One mission, his bombardier got up off his chair, walked up to my dad to borrow a Lucky Strike cigarette from him, lights it up, goes back to sit down, and there was a hole blowed through his bombardier's chair, a piece of shrapnel.
There are the black smudges of the flak that come up from the aircraftmen's below.
And every time one of those shells explode, they leave a great big black cloud. And one of the waist gunners said at one time, he said he swore he could have jumped out of the plane and walked across the smoke because it was so heavy. One mission Dad was talking about, flying along, and the plane was actually pulsating as the shrapnel bombs was going off. And so he motions to the other planes that he could see to go up 10 feet. They raised 10 feet in elevation, and the plane quit pulsating. The ball turret on the bottom could be, you could climb into it and out of it from the plane. But if it got damaged and you couldn't roll the ball over to get your door up, they would turn all the bolts. They could actually unbolt that ball turret and drop it off. And then the ball turret gunner is on his own to get out of it and get his parachute deployed. Dad's ball turret gunner went out there one night with a hammer and ball-peened all of his bolts where they weren't going to be able to drop him off. But you know, if you think about doing a belly landing and you're in the ball turret on the bottom, you aren't going to live. You know, but he wasn't going to be dropped out.
We're winning these air battles inside Europe for 2 principal reasons. The first is because we have better airplanes, better bombers, and better fighters. The second and most important one is because of the skill, courage, and training of our combat crews.
One of the missions, one of the other planes in their group was shot up so bad it had nothing left in the midsection. The navigator was dead, the radio operator was dead, both waist gunners, the bombardier. The only people living was the pilot and the front gunner and the tail gunner.
The crewmen sacrificed their youth. Their outlook on non-important things had changed drastically. Small things meant nothing. I just got back from a 6-hour tour, 5 hours on oxygen, minus 47 degrees. I've been shot at. I watch other airplanes go down in flames. And you come back and then just, you think about that. That's on your mind. And so your way of thinking and doing things changes drastically. We deal with the big things as they come, and we learn from it, and we move on. And I think that's what the crewmen have to do. They've got to put the day before behind them and think about the upcoming mission. That's what the crewmen gave up. They definitely gave up their innocence.
Bomber crews form tight bonds, right? When you're going up in those things, doing those daylight or night bombing raids, you're putting, you're not knowing if you're going to come back. People form close bonds under those circumstances, but the Days Pay crew seem to kind of go a little bit above and beyond that, because also some of them were in contact with people from Hanford. We have Christmas cards and letters from Hanford construction camp employees that they would write to the crew and back and forth. And you know, I think that bond too was unique for the Days Pay. I mean, they loved that plane.
At Christmas time, they would send over your care packages from your family. My dad got care packages from everybody at Hanford, him and his group. And they got a pallet load of stuff.
These bombs slash at the enemy's rear, destroy his lines of communication, wreck roads and railways, prevent any orderly retreat.
For all the crew and Days Pay, we're praying that each and every one returns home safely. So that's kind of a nice one. It says, greetings you, and they wrote in, and all the crew. Again, those letters back and forth, and how they would really, like, the flight crew would get on the maintenance crew to really take care of the plane, you know, because they would always say, this is the people's plane. Like, this isn't our plane, this isn't your plane. Like, this was a gift to us from these people who gave their pay. You know, there's widows there, you know, there's you know, mothers who lost their kids donated to this plane, you know, so it was you know, it was a special plane. Hello there, I just finished reading the article in our project newspaper about the happenings of our plane, and the suggestion that we send Christmas greetings to you fellows. This seemed like a nice idea to me, and then I read further and discovered that the pilot of Days Pay was a fellow Kansian. My brother, my husband, and 4 brother-in-laws are in the service overseas. My brother is a Marine in the South Pacific, my husband's whereabouts are unknown, and the others are in India, England, Alaska, and France. So you see that our family is quite scattered. I will not bore you with any more ramblings, but want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas wherever you might be. If you have time to think about it on some bombing mission, I wish you would make a special bomb on its way to Germany for my buddy, Lieutenant Bill Dennison, P-38 pilot, who was killed just a year ago.
And now a snaky string of lightnings moves into the battle. They are the fighters that cover the bombers on deepest penetrations into Germany.
Now, take care of Days Pay. We worked hard to get it on the way to you. So don't let her down. We won't let you down.
Just seeing those Christmas cards is really interesting because of the level of camaraderie that's there, the level of kind of like plain speaking, and really like how Hanford employees. I mean, the crew is very reverent to the plane and people, but also the tone you get from those cards is like kind of like a mother checking in on her kids, like, how you guys doing with my plane? You know, like hope you're taking care of our plane. You know, and they did call it like our plane, but there was also like a lot of love wishing them well. And I think like that connection, right, between these people, both working for the war, but you know, but this direct connection from the home front to the theater, right, and through this plane, and the way that they really spoke plainly to each other, and the respect there is just really something to see.
Back at the base, flares are used to help guide the planes in.
My dad procured a few things out of the plane, you know, and he was ashamed by it later, but the altimeter, his earphones, he had them, but the altimeter, we took my mother-in-law to the mountains 2 years ago for her 75th birthday, and if you had the barometric pressure, an altimeter built in 1942 still kept perfect spot-on altitude. Right towards the end, when he was about to pass on, the cancer pretty much had him. He started trying to find that plane. And my sister went with him a time or two down to the Phoenix scrapyard, and he would spend a week at a time going through that scrapyard, through plane by plane by plane, trying to find pieces of Days Pay. And he died not knowing what happened to it. On my dad's tombstone, Dad was so proud of Day's Pay and everything it meant to him that he told my mom they'd like to have Day's Pay put on his headstone. And it is so precise, you can even read the Day's Pay emblem on it.
Discussing things with Thelma Weiniger, she said she was so thankful that Day's Pay was a lucky plane because it brought her husband back to her. It also brought the other crew members home who went on to have successful families, successful lives, and they were all proud that they flew Day's Pay. They absolutely loved the airplane. The families even today are grateful for the contributions that these Hamper workers made 78 years ago towards the war effort. And Day's Pay was a lucky plane. These men all came back to raise families. They're incredibly fortunate. There's so many men lost their lives. There's 28,000 men in the Army Air Corps over that period of time were lost in those air campaigns. And we're thankful for them. We're thankful for their children and their continued efforts to raise good families. It's a lucky plane. So Arliss Weiniger returned back to Tribune, Kansas, and he'd had several offers to fly commercial out of Florida. And his wife responded, "No, you're done flying, we're going to farm." So that was the end of Arliss's flying career. So then we move on to Robert Neal. He came back from England and went to his home state of Texas being a ranching. And he worked in the ranch until about 1954, and he suffered a heart attack, so he needed to reduce his workload. So he became a bank cashier. By the time he got close to retirement, he was a major shareholder in the bank, which turned out to be a nice, tidy sum for him and his wife to retire on. His hard work and dedication to family and country is what he impressed upon his family, and when you speak to them, that's what you get. Now, Seymour, or Red Deutsch, he came back, obviously in 45, went back to Brooklyn, New York, and became involved and married his childhood sweetheart. He stayed in the military. He was assigned to 2 different airfields in Texas for 6 months, where he was still navigating and flying B-29s. He did that for a period of time. He was honorary released in October 45, and he remained an officer in the Reserve Corps through the 50s. He eventually went back to school, received his degree in accounting, and went to work for one of the largest real estate firms in New York. And what he always said to his children is, "We have a beautiful life." Ball turret gunner Charlie Purcell, he went back to school, Georgia Tech. And with that engineering degree, he went to work for Allis Chalmers, for the people that build tractors and such. And then met his wife in 1950, and then a little bit later on he bought 30 acres from a family heritage plot that had been in the family for probably close to 100 years. So he built his home, and he called it New Garden, is what he called it. The bombardier Frank McCann, or Mac as they like to call him, he attended the reunion they had in 1984 in Charlie Purcell's home in North Carolina. And we don't have much information on him after the war. So the waste gunner Edwin Stewart returned back to Florida and took up work in a gas station. Pretty successful at it, and he eventually bought his own station that he ran for a number of years and finally sold it in 1982. And the family, him and his wife, traveled frequently while the son stayed home and ran the service station business. They went to places like Australia. They went to Alaska. And how they financed that was delivering newspapers together as husband and wife. He's one of the few remaining people who received an award from the government of France. Tail gunner Chester Pierges. He returned back home to Lorain, Ohio, and went to work for the American Crucible Products in their foundry. He was there for 38 years to support his wife and children, and he never complained. Everything was about family. He never bought things for himself. He'd come home every Friday, put the check on the table for his wife to cash. His son says he was Jimmy Stewart, Red Skelton, and Andy Griffith all rolled up into one. His sons came to visit him in the foundry. He says, "Man, it was hot, sweaty, oily, stinky." And he'd tell his children, "Don't ever do this. Get an education." All of his children have 2 degrees and are very successful. And of course, Alan Cohen, he returned to Pennsylvania and went to work in the family jewelry business. Did that for a period of time, and then he switched careers and decided to become a car salesman. He sold Pontiacs. In 55 or 56, he went and bought his own Rambler dealership and kept that till 1966. And then Rambler went away, and he started switched to Dodge in 67 until 70, and then switched again from 70 to 79 as a Ford dealer. Someone in the company had embezzled, and they lost the business. So he went to work for the local Mercedes dealership, became the oldest salesman in the Mercedes dealerships in the United States. Talking with his son earlier today, his dad always taught us is do the right thing no matter how hard it is. And yeah, the children are very proud of their parents. They love their parents, and their parents love them, and all the destruction of things that these men had seen and lives destroyed, I think they had a very keen interest in having a family and keeping them close.
B-17!
So what a successful campaign, you know, where people are still following it. And it's really interesting to see how the community continues to embrace. It shows the enduring appeal of the people in this story, that we have, the Day's Pay has been a symbol for Richland High School. The Day's Pay has a book on it. The Day's Pay is the name of a IPA at bombing range. The Day's Pay is now the police badge symbol in the city of Richland, right? It lives on. You know, there's just something that's timeless about the Day's Pay. And really, you know, that shows what people can do when they come together. And we need good stories like that, right? Where people come together for the greater good.